What actually makes someone kill over and over again? It's not always evil or madness. It's something far more unsettling. The journey from ordinary life to cold-blooded murderer is darker and more complex than most imagine, and you will be shocked by what goes on in their minds. On today's episode of The Infographic Show, we're revealing what really drove serial killers to commit their crimes. Number 10. Herbert Mullen suffered from paranoid schizophrenia, which led him to spending multiple short stays in mental hospitals in his early adulthood. Although most of the doctors who treated him judged that he wasn't harmful to others, his symptoms worsened over time due to his regular use of cannabis and LSD. Mullen suffered a lot of eco-anxiety. He was worried about the effects of pollution on the human body and was terrified of natural disasters, especially earthquakes. His birthday fell on April 18th, the same day as the devastating 1906 San Francisco earthquake, which he took as a bad omen. Moving back in with his parents in the Santa Cruz Mountains of California did nothing to quiet his growing fears. In 1972, Mullen started to experience severe delusions based around the idea that giving a blood sacrifice to nature was the only way to stop earthquakes from happening. He believes that the Vietnam War had provided enough bodies to hold them off, but now that the war was winding down, Mullen had to make the sacrifices himself. Between 1972 and 73, he kidnapped 13 people around California, mostly hitchhikers, campers, and vagrants, who were selected based on telepathic instructions Mullins claimed to be receiving. His first victim supposedly reached out to Mullen's mind and told him to kill me so others can be saved. He cut open his second victim's body post-mortem to look for evidence of harmful pollution. Unlike a lot of serial killers, Mullins didn't get any kind of gratification out of his crimes. At one point, he went to church to confess, which didn't go so well since the priest Father Henri Tomei was one of his victims. Mullen claimed that Tomei volunteered, but that's a claim we have to take with a grain of salt, since Mullen believed he might have received that consent telepathically. After killing Tomei, Mullen tried to join the Marines, believing it would let him carry out his mission legally. He was rejected, however, after refusing to sign paperwork acknowledging his criminal record. Hoping to silence his hallucinations, Mullen quit drugs entirely, but the killings continued. His next victim was his former high school weed dealer, Jim Gianera, whom Mullen accused of ruining his life before murdering him in retaliation. He went on to kill several more innocent people before being captured in 1973. But compared to our next killer, Mullen's motivations seemed downright altruistic. Number 9. Jeffrey Dahmer, also known as the Milwaukee Cannibal, killed and desecrated the bodies of 17 men and boys between 1978 and 1991. Despite being diagnosed with borderline and schizotypal personality disorders, he was found to be legally sane at his trial. So why did he do it? Dahmer's motivations, as it turns out, were a mix of abandonment issues and sexual sadism. Dahmer's father would leave town for long periods for work. His mother was a depressed hypochondriac who would stay in bed for most days, abusing medications to induce illness. Dahmer became obsessed with bones from an early age and would collect any animal skeletons he found. His father, who worked as a chemist, was the one who taught the young Jeffrey how to safely clean and bleach animal bones, hoping that it would spark an interest in the natural sciences. Instead, it planted something much darker, a fascination that he would one day turn on human beings. Dahmer had a hard time making friends at school, and even though he got decent grades, he would also do things like bring alcohol to school and drink it in class. He also used to fake seizures to get attention from his classmates. He did it so much that doing a Dahmer became slang at his school for whenever someone was being loud and annoying. When he was a teenager, he realized that he was gay and briefly dated another boy at his school in secret, but the relationship didn't last. At this same time, Dahmer's parents divorced, and his mother's drug use got worse, causing him to feel increasingly isolated and retreat into his sexual fantasies. Dahmer started committing murders the same year he graduated from high school. All of his victims were other gay men, often sex workers or men he met while cruising, whom Dahmer murdered and cannibalized in a desperate attempt to keep them from leaving him. He was so obsessed with possessing other men that he was banned from a number of men's bathhouses for drugging his hookups with sleeping pills. He once even gave his victim a botched lobotomy in an attempt to turn him into an obedient zombie pet. You may not be able to relate to Dahmer's bizarre fantasies, but maybe, like our next killer, you have always lusted for revenge against those who did you wrong. Number 8. Eileen Wuornos was born in Michigan in 1956 and had the kind of childhood that feels like it could only lead to a life of crime. Her father was given a life sentence for kidnapping and sexual assault before she was even born. Her mother, Diane, left Eileen and her brother in the care of her grandparents, who were both alcoholics. As a teenager, Eileen became pregnant, and after giving birth and giving the baby up for adoption, her grandparents kicked her out, leaving her completely on her own. For the rest of her teen years, she supported herself through prostitution and was known for constantly getting into bar fights. In 1976, when she was 18, she hitchhiked to Florida, where she married the 69-year-old president of a yacht club. Within weeks, she was in jail for assault, and her husband had a restraining order against her. From 1976 to 1989, she committed armed robberies, assault, check fraud, and car theft in cities across Florida. But she settled down briefly in 1986 when she met Tyra Moore at a lesbian bar in Daytona Beach. The two fell in love and moved in together, with Wuornos supporting the couple with the money she made through prostitution. Her killing spree started in 1989, and she had a very consistent MO. While working as a street prostitute, she would get men to pick her up. Then, when they pulled over in a secluded location, she would shoot them, rob them, and dispose of their bodies. Wuornos claimed that most of her murders were done out of self-defense, and that all 7 of the men she killed were attempting to assault her. But that claim has never been proven or disproven. It is far more likely that Wuornos killed out of sheer anger and rage, a result of years of abuse, rejection, and trauma that had built up over her life. But what's more believable than taking lives for the thing that truly rules our culture? Cold hard cash. Number 7. In the 19th century, the understanding of medicine developed at a rapid pace, and the city of Edinburgh, Scotland, was one of Europe's biggest hubs for new medical research. There was just one problem. Under Scottish law, the only corpses that could be used in medical research were people who had died in prison, foundlings, or orphans. These restrictions meant that there weren't exactly a good cross-section of humanity for scientists and doctors to work with. So as a result of this demand for cadavers, a black market for dead bodies developed. So-called resurrection men would usually source corpses through grave robbing, but one unscrupulous duo decided that they could be proactive and make their own corpses. The serial killers, William Burke and William Hare. Burke was born in Ireland in 1792 but left the country and abandoned his family in 1818 after an argument with his father-in-law. He married his second wife after moving to Scotland, and the two of them made a living as street vendors. Hare had a number of jobs in construction and coal mining. He met Burke in 1827, and the men became fast friends. Burke and his wife moved into Hare's lodging house in Tanner's Close. After Donald, one of the other lodgers who owed Hare 4 pounds of rent money, died of dropsy, Burke and Hare figured that they could cover the rent by selling Donald's body to a local anatomist. They stole the body out of the coffin and sold it to a Dr. Robert Knox at Edinburgh University, who gave the pair 7 pounds 10 shillings. Apparently, he told the pair that he would be glad to see them again when they had another to dispose of. Realizing that they had a solid money-making gig on their hands, Burke and Hare went on to kill 16 people, all of them lodgers in Hare's house. Afterwards, they would bring the corpses to the university. They were able to earn as much as 10 pounds on some of them, which is the equivalent of over $2,700 in today's money. But not all killers murder for profit. Some do it just because they're working for the man downstairs. Number 6. Richard Ramirez, also known as the Night Stalker, killed at least 15 people in 1984 and 85 around Los Angeles and the Bay Area in California. Like a lot of killers on this list, he had a difficult childhood. He was physically abused by his father, resulting in brain damage. He'd started taking drugs when he was just 10. As a teen, he developed a strong interest in all things morbid due to spending a lot of time around his older cousin Mike Valdez, a violent man who used to brag about killing civilians in the Vietnam War. Valdez also murdered his wife when Ramirez was 15. Ramirez witnessed the killing, and instead of being traumatized, he later admitted that her death became a source of fascination for him. Ramirez dropped out of high school in 1975 and moved from Texas to California when he was 22. At this point, he was heavily using cocaine and supported his drug habit by committing burglary. His later crimes included both varieties of assault, which eventually led to him starting his spree of murders and sex crimes. Ramirez used a variety of different weapons for his murders, ranging from firearms to knives to a crowbar. But what linked them together was the fact that Ramirez was obsessed with the occult and claimed that his murders were inspired by Satanism. He would mark his victims and the scenes of his crimes with satanic symbols, cutting pentagrams and inverted crosses into his victims' bodies after violating them. He would draw pentagrams on the walls with lipstick. The victims who he let live reported that after beating and degrading them, he forced them to swear their allegiance to Satan. Richard Ramirez was arrested in August of 1985 and his trial began in 1988. At his first court appearance, he raised his hand, which had a pentagram drawn on it, and yelled out, "Hail Satan," to the court. And somehow, he is still not as diabolical as the mastermind behind our next killings. Number 5. For 3 weeks in October of 2002, the Washington, D.C. metropolitan area was terrorized by a string of murders carried out by 2 men, 41-year-old John Allen Muhammad and 17-year-old Lee Boyd Malvo, better known as the Beltway Snipers. In the tradition of Jack the Ripper and the Zodiac Killer, the killers taunted police with messages like "Call me God" written on the back of a death tarot card, and "Your children are not safe anywhere, anytime." Schools in the D.C. metro area stopped letting students outside at recess, and residents were warned to be wary while filling their cars up, as 2 of the victims had been shot at gas stations. As 9/11 was still fresh in most people's minds, the media ran with the assumption that the killings were ideologically motivated acts of terrorism. But that is not really the whole story. Muhammad and Malvo actually started their crime spree in Tacoma, Washington, on the other side of the country. The first victim was a woman whose aunt was a close friend of Muhammad's ex-wife, the same woman who had encouraged her to file for divorce. The second killing happened in Tucson, Arizona, and took place while Muhammad was in town visiting his sister. Later killings took place in Atlanta, Georgia, Montgomery, Alabama, and Hammond, Louisiana, as Muhammad and Malvo moved from coast to coast in a car that had been modified into a rolling sniper's nest. Muhammad's real target was his ex-wife Mildred, whom he had threatened in the past. His plan was to cover up the attempt and throw police off his trail by disguising her murder as a part of the larger terrorist-style killing spree. To that end, Muhammad got Malvo involved in his scheme, taking advantage of the teenager's apparently fragile mental state in order to get him to do his bidding. After being arrested, Malvo wrote a number of incoherent diatribes about his jihad against the United States, which also mentioned characters and events from The Matrix. It's unclear, however, to what degree he actually believed anything that he wrote. But our next killer made Malvo look like the absolute picture of ideal mental health. Number 4. Richard Chase, also known as the Vampire of Sacramento, killed and drank the blood of 6 people between December 1977 and January 1978. As a teenager, he started taking cannabis and LSD. This exacerbated his then undiagnosed schizophrenia, a condition that he inherited from his mother. His early delusions were pretty harmless. He thought that he was a member of Jesse James's outlaw gang and wanted his parents to get him a cowboy hat. But his strange behavior made it hard for him to hold down a job and housing. One group of housemates, all members of a band, eventually kicked him out after he insisted on joining their jam sessions, where he played the conga drum extremely badly. Chase started to grow paranoid about his health, claiming that his heart had stopped beating or his cranial bones had come apart. He became obsessed with anatomy in an attempt to understand what he believed was wrong with him. In 1973, he was institutionalized after a severe panic attack where he believed his pulmonary artery had been stolen. After he was released, he moved back in with his parents. But over time, he became convinced that his mother and sister were controlling his mind. After an incident where he slapped his mother across the face, his parents bought him an apartment and forced him to move out. For a while, he seemed to be doing fine, but was institutionalized again after he got severely ill, and it turned out he had been eating live rabbits and injecting himself with their blood. Even though some staff at the mental hospital thought that he hadn't received enough care, he was released. And against doctors' orders, Chase's mother weaned him off of his medication. Chase started drinking animal blood because he believed he had been infected with a Nazi poison that would make all his blood turn to powder if he didn't replace it with new blood. When he thought that the animal blood wasn't working anymore, he started committing murders to get human blood. When he was arrested, he claimed that he'd only killed some dogs and that he was being framed for murders by Italians. Chase was clearly a deeply disturbed man, unlike our next killer, who was a straight-up evil genius. Number 3. Ted Kaczynski was a mathematics prodigy who earned his master's and doctoral degrees from the University of Michigan in 1964 and 1967. In 1967, when he was just 25, he became an acting assistant professor at the University of California, Berkeley, where he was the youngest assistant professor at the school. However, he wasn't well liked, and his students said that he felt uncomfortable teaching and didn't engage with their questions. Kaczynski resigned from his job out of the blue to move back in with his parents in Illinois in 1969. 2 years later, he moved again, but this time to a cabin he'd built in the woods in Montana. At the time, it seemed like he just wanted to get away from the streets of academia and live a quiet, simple life, but it would turn out later that his life would be anything but quiet. From that cabin, he would carry out a campaign of terror that involved mailing bombs to a number of targets that Kaczynski thought were destroying the planet. These bombs killed 3 and injured another 23 between 1978 and 1995. Under the alias the Unabomber, Kaczynski penned a manifesto detailing the motivation for his attacks. He believed that technological progress was evil and that industrialization had led to devastating consequences on both the environment and the human psyche. He argued that most people wasted time on unfulfilling pursuits with artificial rewards because of technology. He called these activities surrogate activities, and they included consuming entertainment, supporting sports teams, and scientific work. But they also included political activism, which means the Unabomber was kind of a hypocrite. The Unabomber could broadly be described as an anarcho-primitivist. His goal was to restore the planet by halting technological progress, believing that humanity would then return to a simpler, more natural way of life, free from the shackles of modern society. He rejected both right-wing and left-wing ideologies, calling leftism a symbol of over-socialization and inconsistent with nature, and calling fascism kook ideology. In a New York Times op-ed from 1998, James Q. Wilson wrote, "The Unabomber does not like socialization, technology, leftist political causes, or conservative attitudes." Apart from his call for an unspecified revolution, his paper resembles something that a very good graduate student might have written. "We can say one thing for certain, you would rather meet him alone at night than our next killer, especially if said killer had just had an argument with his mom." Number 2. Edmund Kemper, also known as the Co-Ed Killer, was born in 1948 in Burbank, California. His father was a World War II veteran who was involved in nuclear weapons testing, and this seems to have left an impression on young Edmund. One of his favorite games to play with his sisters as a child was Gas Chamber, where he would pretend to die by poison gas inhalation. Some other fun sibling activities he and his sisters got up to included Edmund cutting the heads off his younger sister's dolls and his older sister trying to drown him in the pool. Kemper's parents divorced in 1961, which he took very badly due to having had a close relationship with his father. His mother, Clarnell, was controlling and abusive. She refused to give him any affection out of a belief it would turn him gay, instead opting to smack him, insult him to his face, and lock him in the basement overnight. At 14, Kemper had had enough and ran away from home to go to his father's new house in Los Angeles. But unfortunately, Kemper's father had remarried since the divorce, and he wanted absolutely nothing to do with the children from his first marriage. Kemper was sent to live with his paternal grandparents, who would become his first victims in 1964 when he was just 15. He was arrested and sent to Atascadero State Hospital, a maximum security facility for the criminally insane. He stayed there for 5 years, where he received treatment and gained a good reputation among the staff. After it was decided he was no longer a threat to others, he was released. But against the advice of the doctors, the court put him back in the custody of his mother. The two fought constantly, and even after Kemper was able to save up enough money to move in with a friend in Alameda, she still called him and visited constantly. His anger at his mother was what fueled the string of murders between 1972 and 73. His victims were exclusively female, and he would seek them out after he and his mother had been fighting. Clarnell Kemper would end up being her son's last victim. After killing her, he calmly turned himself into the cops, saying the original purpose was gone, which is honestly gentlemanly compared to our next killers, who likely never would have stopped if their horrific crimes didn't go viral. Number 1. In June and July of 2007, the town of Dnipropetrovsk was rocked by a series of violent murders. The victims were seemingly unconnected, but evidence suggested they all had been beaten to death with a hammer. Some had been killed one at a time, but in other cases, police would find multiple bodies on the same day. Although law enforcement kept details of the case from the public, rumors started to spread and people started to stay inside at night. Eventually, police identified the killers after discovering that items belonging to their victims had been sold at several local pawn shops. The descriptions taken from the pawnbrokers matched those from the witnesses to the murders. 3 19-year-olds were arrested for the murders: Viktor Sayenko, Igor Suprunyuk, and Alexander Hanza. The group had been friends since they were 14 when they started doing increasingly dangerous things together in an attempt to overcome their fears. It began with the two hanging off the balcony of their apartment building to conquer a shared fear of heights, but soon their experiments turned darker. They started torturing animals in an attempt to cure Hanza of his fear of blood. This dangerous behavior escalated into theft and robbery. Suprunyuk would pose as a taxi driver, luring victims into his car, where he and his friends would rob them. Apparently, their motivation to graduate from robbery to murder was financial. The murders had all been filmed, and some had been posted online, including an infamous video known as 3 Guys, 1 Hammer. According to one of their girlfriends, the boys had been contacted by an anonymous foreign benefactor who was going to pay them big money for 40 authentic murder videos. The prosecutors disagreed, saying that the killers had committed their vile deeds to feel a sense of power and notoriety. With them all behind bars and no further arrests having been made, the truth is, we'll never really know. You've heard serial killers explain why they did it, but here is how the law caught up with them. Watch how these sneaky serial killers finally got caught to see how their perfect crimes fell apart. Or click on this video instead.